here to talk about art appreciation, and in order to appreciate art, you must first know the definition of art. So the Google definition of art is the expression or application of human creative skill and imagination, typically in a visual form such as painting or sculpture, producing works to be appreciated primarily for their beauty or emotional power. And I couldn't give a better definition than that. And so the definition of art appreciation is the knowledge and understanding of the universal and timeless qualities that identify all great art. And I'm here to appreciate art. So the piece of artwork that I'm going to critique is The Kiss by Gustav Klimt. But first, a little history about him. So he was an Austrian painter, and he became known for his highly decorative style and erotic nature of his works, which were seen as a rebellion against the traditional academic art of his time. And so during the golden phase in the early 1900s was where he really thrived, and he created a series of paintings that made extensive use of ornamental gold leaf in a flat, two-dimensional perspective. The canvas depicts a couple embracing. Their bodies are entwined in elaborate robes decorated in a style influenced by both linear constructs of contemporary Art Nouveau style and the organic forms of the early arts and crafts movement. The rest of the painting around the couple sort of dissolves around them in this shimmering flat pattern. The background evokes a conflict between two-dimensional and three-dimensionality. This painting is an oil painting, and it's very colorful and vibrant and just bright. The golden literally shines onto your face when you look at this. There's an outline around the people and their clothing, so you can tell where it transitioned from people to clothing to background. And there's a contrast of textures in this, because their clothing has a quilted texture, and then the background is kind of a rough, gritty texture, and then their skin is very smooth. Artwork evokes a world of harmony where the couple is protected and they are in this feeling of being in love, and they're unaware of the real world. He compares the sexual pleasure to the artistic joy and gave them a spiritual dimension. It's also particularly attached to representation of ideal beauty. Because the artist chose flowers to show the primitive side of humans, and one being with nature, that purity contrasts with the sin and darkness of humans. The gold clothing around them symbolizes their unity in that special moment. This man and woman are both losing innocence and gaining impurities of human. The black and white patterns on the man means knowledge, strength, and masculinity, and the floral patterns for women is like feminine, and she's at one with nature. The mood of this painting is very calming. You can feel the intimacy coming off the painting. The artist is showing the beauty of love, but also it's an expression of his emphasis on eroticism, which is kind of a no-no to paint about in his time, especially with styles used in religious paintings. The Kiss falls in line with his exploration of fulfillment and the redeeming power of love and art. The Kiss is abnormal from his frequent portrayal of women as the lustful female that seduces the men. It seems like the man is seducing the woman in this one. A lot of the patterns and aspects of the Kiss are pulled from various styles of places. For example, the use of gold leaves and the gold colors make it look like he's trying to emulate medieval art. And also the girl's hair is kind of in a halo shape, which would be medieval art too. And the leaves in the man's hair are nodding to Greek art. So I interpreted this painting of how when you first kiss someone, or you have just an amazing kiss, that it's bright, beautiful, and a golden moment. This man is so passionately in love with this woman, and she gives in to the temptation of love. The man is somewhat holding back. He's hiding his face a little bit, kind of like he knows that he's doing something wrong and that he's sinning. The woman is connected to nature, and because she's embedded in the flowers, and she has floral patterns on her clothing. The man's clothes are black and white, which symbolizes knowledge and a contrast. And so their embrace symbolizes the balance between the two parts of what love is supposed to mean. And this man is very concrete and structured, while the woman is in love and she's beautiful. So artists use many different techniques to get the look they want in their final product. So the first art technique I'm going to talk about is drawing. And so drawing is just a pastime of everyone now. And back then it wasn't, because the materials were not easy to obtain. And so until the 13th century, paper wasn't even manufactured in the Western world. And so paper back then was made out of fiber from scraps of cloth. And until the 15th century, it was not cheap and it was not easy to obtain, but in the 15th century, it was. And so that made drawing more of an everyday common man thing. And so another material they used to draw back then was chalk or charcoal. And that allowed them to have a softer medium, and it's easier to give a sense of like 3 dimensions. So the charcoal and chalk could be hard and like have hard lines, and how you get that is you sharpen it, and then you use the edge you sharpened, and then so it's like a pencil, and that makes precise points and really sharp edges. Or it could be soft, and that's you use the side of the chalk or charcoal, and that gives you large, bold gestures and more of a smooth look. So the second art technique I'm going to talk about is synthetic media. And synthetic media was created to replace oil paintings because it was for people who desired faster drying paint and who wanted to paint outdoors. And so what allowed them to do these two things is acrylic paint. So acrylic paint could dry faster than oil paintings, and it could withstand the weather and the temperature outside while still giving the atmospheric look they desired. Here are two paintings that I used acrylic paint to create. Third art technique that I'm going to talk about is silkscreen printing. And what silkscreen printing is that it's a printing technique where mesh or fabric is used to transfer ink onto a substrate. And it doesn't go into areas that's made impermeable by a blocking stencil. And so the material originally used for silkscreen printing was a piece of silk, hint the name. But nowadays we use polyester nylon. And so what happens is that the fabric is stretched tightly on a frame, and the artist placed their stencil on there so that the ink will go where they want it to go. And so the ink is very thick, so you have to use a squeegee type tool, also known as a fill blade tool, and go back and forth and keep going back and forth until the ink has went into the fabric. And so in the end you come up with stuff like this. Sandro Botticelli was an Italian Renaissance artist. Details and records of his life are very vague, and some are yet to be uncovered, but what we know of him was that he was known to be an art apprentice at the age of 14, and this gave an impression that he was able to undertake a more comprehensive art education than the rest of the Renaissance painters and sculptors. His works are seen as low relief with drawings evident on outlines, and they have varying contrasts of light and shadow, and they're usually very realistic. One of his paintings, Venus and Mars, shows the Roman gods Mars and Venus in an allegory of beauty. The youthful and self-indulgent couple are reclined in a forest setting surrounded by the playful satyrs. What's odd about this painting is that Venus, who is not only wide awake but is fully dressed, while Mars is asleep and he is only wearing a cloth. Is the goddess of love so powerful that she can knock out a man with only her gaze? The painting was done in tempera on panel. Tempera is a type of paint where the pigment is mixed with a binder like egg yolk. Tempera dries really quickly, and while it doesn't have the richness of a oil painting, it doesn't darken. So another artist that I'm going to talk about is Salvador Dali, and he was a surrealist artist, and he used many methods to reflect his ideas, which included painting, charcoal, film, and sculpture. And when he created these paintings, at the time they were amusing, but they were also radical and somewhat unorthodox. The persistence of memory is one of his most famous pieces of work. In the painting, pocket watches melt on branches and countertops. Another watches ants spewing out of it. Half of a face is lying on the ground. It's just insane. The slug-like body in the middle is actually a self-portrait of Dali. This painting is usually interpreted as representing Einstein's theory on time, since the theory had been written and printed around that same time. This hand-painted dream photographs the clocks that may symbolize the passing of time as one experiences it in sleep and dreams. So one of the artists I'm going to talk about is Frida Kahlo, and she was a Mexican artist and was best known for her self-portraits that she painted of herself. And so her art has been celebrated in Mexico, and it represents national indigenous tradition, and it has also been celebrated by feminists for their forethought depiction of the female form. And so a little bit about her is that when she was younger, she was diagnosed with polio, and one of her legs was smaller than the other, and so she would wear these long skirts to cover up her polio so no one would know. And then when she was 18, she got into a horrible wreck, and she almost died. Most of her body was dislocated or broken, and she had to have over 35 surgeries just to fix all of that. And during her rehabilitation, she took up painting in her free time, and she found it as a form of therapy to express her feelings. So her work only became famous in the 1980s when the feminists of the world were reviving all artwork by women, and so her contribution to art was finally recognized after that. One of Frida Kahlo's most famous self-portraits is The Two Fridas, and what it is that it's an oil painting she painted after her and her husband got divorced. So it's meant to show how lonely and depressed she is. So it shows two Fridas, which symbolize her two personalities. On the right, the artist is shown in modern European attire, wearing the costume she donned prior to her marriage to Riviera. Throughout their marriage, given Riviera's strong nationalism, Kahlo became increasingly interested in indigenism and began to explore traditional Mexican costume, which she wears in the portrait on the left. Both Fridas are exposed, and that's their heart showing, and the stormy sky in the background is meant to be her sadness. And the two Fridas are holding hands to show that she is truly alone during this time in her life, and that she only has herself. Art has had a huge role in everything from history to economics to politics. And so art's role in history is that it's been around since we've been around. I mean, you can go now to a famous cave and look at caveman art. They used charcoal to write on walls of what they were seeing at that time. And so what art does is that it preserves what fact-based historical records cannot, how it felt to exist in a particular place at a particular time. And so when you look closely at art, you're able to tell the time period of when it was created and the culture it was created in because of the materials they use, the techniques they use, and the symbolism within it. And so art is most of the time a vehicle for social change. Social changes started with the Stone Age, and then you have a whole bunch of these art periods that come after it. So to name a few, you have this you started with the Stone Age, and then you went to Egyptian, and then Greek and Roman, and then you went to the Chinese art, and then a couple centuries later you have Middle Ages, and then the Renaissance, and then you have the beautiful art of Romanticism, and then you have Realism come up, and then you have abstract, and then now we're in the period of postmodernism, which started in the 70s. There have been wars and battles over art. So, for example, during World War II, the Nazis stole countless pieces of art and hid them away. And so they got together some over-the-hill art scholars, historians, and architects, and other experts to retrieve as many as possible, and the men risked their lives to protect some of mankind's greatest achievement. Art has had a huge role in economics. And so one thing is that when an artist creates a piece of artwork and it does really well in the world, it'll bring them in a lot of money. But sometimes, usually the case is that the piece of artwork becomes more valuable when they're dead. So it doesn't really help them out. It helps the area they created it in out. And what I mean by that is that it brings in tourism. Tourism is a huge part of every place's economy. It brings in a lot of money because people have to stay in hotels, they have to buy things in your country or state or city. And so one place that this is a good example of is Italy, because of the Renaissance age, and that was like the hot spot of the Renaissance age, and you have works of like Michelangelo and Leonardo da Vinci there. And so that brings in a lot of tourists and a lot of money for areas, and it helps them out economically. Well, because art brings people together and brings more people in, politicians will go to these areas with art and hope to persuade these people that like the art to, vote for them. And so someone could have possibly changed a government with artwork. They could have shown how bad or how good it was and made people and persuaded people to change their ideas based on their artwork. And so freedom of speech, which is part of our First Amendment, has a lot to do with artwork because you have the freedom to express yourself, and then that deals with art and expressing yourself. And then so negatively in politics, propaganda could be considered art sometimes because it is a drawing, it is graphically made sometimes, but because it is this exchanging of ideals, and it's a form of media that can influence people's ideology on a particular issue with a cultural or political strategy. So that is kind of a negative view on it, but it is a way that art has had a role in politics. One main way that art is made and sold is that it's mass-produced. And so when it's mass-produced, it's not an original copy. People take famous paintings and they'll make copies of it, or painters will make copies of it and sell them at a cheaper price. And these paintings could be sold in bulk, so you could buy more than one, or you can just buy one, but at a cheap price. And so one place that does this is DAP in China, and the painters there will recreate known paintings, and tourists will come and buy them. And so the people that buy these mass-produced paintings don't mind having a copy of a famous painting in their house just because it's more practical to buy a $10 painting than a $1 million painting. Another way that art is made and sold is that it's originally produced, which means that there's one painting, one painter, and this makes it more expensive and more genuine. And so, for example, Pablo Picasso's nude green leaves and bust was sold for $106.5 million, and that painting only took him a day to make. And so these famous paintings that are really expensive usually are sold to museums and galleries because not one person should own that. Everyone should get to see that. And so more people tend to like original paintings better just because they can feel the connection with the true painter and not just be looking at a copy of it. There are tons and tons of reasons why people make art. And so to name a few, it could just be to entertain a viewer. It could just be for fun. You're a good artist and you want to show people that. But it can also be to express your feelings in different ways. So a lot of people can't express feelings in any other way, and art's a good escape for them. It's a good way to write down or draw a thought or a feeling or a memory that they want to remember in the future. And so for that, it could be therapeutic for some people. It's a good way to rehabilitate yourself and really put your mind on a canvas. And so it could also be used to inform or persuade. So informing, you could inform someone about something that they might not know is going on in the whole world. And then to persuade, you can try to persuade people on things like animal cruelty or politics or anything. And then so one of the main reasons people do it is to inspire. To inspire is a huge thing. And artists may not know that they're inspiring other people to create art, but they are every time they create a fantastic piece. And everyone makes art to escape from the reality of the world and make their own reality within a painting or a sculpture or music even. Every artist has a different and personal reason for why they create art, so you can't always just pinpoint why they did it. You have to really know about their history and their personalities, because everyone has their own personal aesthetic that they like. And so, for example, when I look at art or when I like art or make art, I like to have soft edges and blended lines, and asymmetrical balance really appeals to me just because it's so not normal. And I like when art is very realistic and you're able to just kind of like feel the wind that is in the painting or smell the flowers that are in the painting. And when there's realistic paintings of animals and people, I think that's really interesting because people are really hard to draw and paint, and I just really am impressed when people can do that.